My name is Noah. I was 11 years old when my parents went to New York for what they called a quick work trip and left me alone in our house in Portland. They didn't say it like a warning. They said it like a favor I should be grateful for. "It's just for a bit," my mom said, adjusting the strap of her bag. "You're old enough now." My dad nodded from the doorway, already checking his phone. "We'll be back before you even notice." Those were their words. Not alone. Not no one will be here. Just something temporary enough to believe. I stood in the hallway and watched them move through the house one last time. My mom glanced at the kitchen, opened the fridge, closed it again without really looking. My dad picked up his jacket, then put it back down, then picked it up again. No one sat me down. No one explained what would happen if something went wrong. No one wrote anything down. My mom hugged me quickly, like she was already late. My dad squeezed my shoulder the way he did when he thought that was enough. Then the door closed. I didn't move right away. I listened to the sound of their car pulling out of the driveway, the engine fading down the street, the quiet settling back into the house like it had been waiting. The house didn't feel scary. It felt paused. I told myself this wasn't a big deal. I'd stayed home alone before, after school on weekends, sometimes for an entire day. I knew how to make food. I knew how to lock the doors. I knew how to act like nothing was wrong. This was just longer. The first day passed easily. I ate leftovers. I watched TV without worrying about how loud it was. I stayed up later than usual and didn't feel guilty about it. That night, I slept fine. The house made the same sounds it always did. The heater clicked on and off. A branch tapped lightly against the window. Nothing felt out of place. In the morning, I woke up to sunlight filling my room. I checked my phone. No messages yet. I poured cereal into a bowl and ate standing at the counter. Standing felt easier, like I didn't have to decide anything yet. I told myself this was what being old enough looked like. Later that afternoon, my mom texted, "Everything good?" I answered right away. "Yeah." A few seconds passed. "See? We knew you'd be fine." I stared at the screen longer than I needed to. Not because the message was wrong, because it was simple. And simple meant no one would look closer. The second day felt slower. Not bad, just stretched. Time didn't seem to move in clear sections anymore. Morning blended into afternoon. I forgot to eat until my stomach reminded me. I made something quick and moved on. I went outside for a bit and sat on the front steps. A neighbor walked by with a dog. Someone waved. No one asked where my parents were. That night, the house felt bigger. The dark stayed longer in the corners. I turned the TV on and let it play even when I wasn't watching. The noise made the rooms feel occupied. Before bed, I checked my phone again. Nothing new. I told myself they were busy. They'd said they'd be back before I noticed. Just for a bit. Lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, a thought crossed my mind and stayed longer than the others. No one actually knows I'm here by myself. I didn't panic. I didn't get scared. I just noticed it. The way you notice a crack in the sidewalk after you've already stepped over it. I turned onto my side and listened to the house settle around me. Nothing bad had happened. Everything still worked. And for now, that felt like proof enough. I fell asleep believing what they told me, that this would end before it turned into anything worth noticing. I didn't know yet how quietly a quick trip could stretch, or how easy it was for time to keep moving when no one was assigned to keep track of you. By the third day, time began to behave differently. Not in a way that scared me, not in a way that felt wrong. It just stopped asking permission before it moved. Morning didn't announce itself anymore. Afternoon arrived without being invited. I had to check my phone to remember what day it was, and even then, it felt optional. I woke up late and didn't rush. There was no one to be late for. Sunlight had already crossed the floor of my room by the time I got up. I lay there longer than usual, listening. The house was quiet, but not empty. It had a low, steady hum, like it was awake even if no one else was. I went to the kitchen and opened the fridge. Food was still there, but nothing felt like a meal. Just pieces. I took a yogurt, ate half of it, and put it back without thinking. Standing at the counter had become a habit. Sitting down felt like something that required intention. I told myself I'd eat properly later. Later stayed loose. I turned the TV on and let it run while I moved between rooms. Not watching, just letting sound exist. Silence had started to feel heavier, like it made the space too honest. Around midday, I remembered schoolwork. I pulled my backpack onto the couch and flipped it open. Papers slid out. Worksheets, notes, reminders written in someone else's handwriting. I finished some of it. Not all. I told myself it would be fine. That phrase had started showing up everywhere. It'll be fine. It worked because nothing immediately proved it wrong. In the afternoon, my dad texted, "Busy day. You doing okay?" I answered without thinking. "Yeah." A few seconds later, "Knew it. Proud of you." I stared at that word. Proud. It felt strange, being proud of something that didn't feel like an accomplishment. I hadn't done anything special. I hadn't solved a problem or fixed a mistake. I just existed quietly, without needing anything. Maybe that was what they meant. That night, I stayed up later than I realized. Without anyone setting limits, time stretched forward instead of stopping. I didn't notice how tired I was until my eyes started burning. When I finally turned the TV off, the quiet rushed back in too fast. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the house make its nighttime sounds. A click from the heater. A soft knock somewhere in the walls. The faint sound of wind pressing against the windows. Nothing dangerous, just present. I slept lightly, woke up once for no reason, went back to sleep. On the fourth day, I forgot to eat breakfast entirely. Not intentionally, I just moved past it. I didn't feel hungry until later, and by then it felt inconvenient. I grabbed something small and told myself it counted. At school, I noticed how loud everything was. Hallways, lockers, voices overlapping. It felt like stepping into another world that ran on rules I hadn't been using. My teacher asked for homework I hadn't finished. I handed in what I had. "Bring the rest tomorrow," she said. I nodded. Tomorrow felt far away, even though it wasn't. Walking home, I passed houses where windows were open, doors unlocked, someone inside making noise without worrying about it. It struck me how many lives continued without question. When I got home, the house greeted me the same way it always had, quiet, neutral, waiting. I didn't turn the lights on right away. The afternoon sun was enough. I sat on the couch and stared at nothing for a while, feeling time slide past without resistance. That was when I noticed something small but unsettling. No one was counting anything. Not my meals, not my sleep, not my days. I pulled a scrap of paper from my backpack and wrote the date at the top. I didn't know why. I wasn't making a list or writing a note. I just wanted the day to exist somewhere solid, something I could point to later if I needed to. I folded the paper and slipped it into my pocket. That night, I checked the locks before bed. Front door, back door, garage. I hadn't done that before. It wasn't fear that made me do it. It was awareness. I lay in bed afterward, listening to the quiet settle around me. Nothing bad had happened. Nothing was falling apart. But something had shifted. Time wasn't being shared anymore. It was being carried. And without realizing it, I had started carrying it alone. I told myself it would only be for a little longer, that a quick trip would end before this feeling turned into something that needed explaining. And for now, that was enough to let me sleep again. By the fifth day, the house had learned me. Not in a way that felt comforting, in a way that felt quiet and efficient, like it no longer expected anyone else to interrupt. I noticed it in small things first, the way the floorboards stopped surprising me, the way I could tell which room I was near just by the sound under my feet, the way the refrigerator seemed louder at night, like it was the only thing still doing its job. I moved through the rooms without turning lights on unless I needed them. I knew where everything was now. I didn't have to think about it. That morning, I woke up before my alarm and turned it off before it could ring. Not because I was early, because I didn't need it. There was nothing waiting on the other side of the sound. I sat on the edge of my bed and listened to the house breathe. That had become my morning habit. Not stretching, not checking my phone, just listening. I skipped breakfast again, not deliberately. I just didn't feel like stopping for it. Hunger had started to feel like background noise, something I could ignore if I stayed busy enough. At school, I noticed how easily I blended in. No one looked twice. I laughed at the right times. I answered questions when called on. I passed through the day without friction. That was the part that scared me later. How easy it was to disappear without going anywhere. After school, I walked home slowly. I wasn't in a hurry to get there, but I wasn't avoiding it either. The house waited the same way it always did. Inside, I opened the fridge and stared at the shelves. Food was still there, but it felt like it belonged to someone else, like I was borrowing from a future version of myself who would eventually have to explain why nothing made sense anymore. I closed the door without taking anything and sat at the kitchen table. The scrap of paper in my pocket felt heavier now. I took it out and smoothed it flat. One date written neatly at the top. Just one. I added another underneath it. 2 days side by side. It wasn't evidence of anything yet. It was just proof that time had passed. That evening, my mom texted, "How's it going, Noah?" Seeing my name made my chest tighten in a way I couldn't explain. "Good," I replied. A pause, then, "We knew you'd handle this." I stared at the message longer than usual. Handle? That word carried weight. It sounded strong, capable, adult, like something I should be proud of. But sitting alone at the table, I realized something about it. Handling meant not needing anything. Handling meant not interrupting. Handling meant no one had to check. I didn't respond. That night, the house sounded louder than it had before. Not threatening, just attentive. Every sound felt closer, more specific. I lay in bed with my eyes open, counting the seconds between them. A tick from the hallway clock, a soft pop from the heater, the low hum of the fridge traveling up through the floor. I wondered what my parents were doing. If they were eating dinner somewhere loud, if they were sleeping without thinking about the house they'd left behind. I wondered if they'd noticed how many days it had been. On the 6th day, I wore the same hoodie I'd worn the day before, not because I wanted to, because it was easier. Laundry felt like something that belonged to another version of this week, one where things had structure. At school, a teacher asked if I was feeling okay. I said yes. She smiled and moved on. That afternoon, I added another date to the paper. 3 now. The line grew downward instead of outward, like something being buried instead of tracked. I folded the paper and slipped it back into my pocket. That evening, I forgot to lock the back door. I realized it only after I was already in bed, staring at the ceiling. The thought came slowly without panic. Did I lock it? I got up and checked. It was unlocked. I locked it and stood there with my hand on the knob longer than I needed to. Not afraid, just aware. Back in bed, I didn't turn the TV on. I wanted to know what the house really sounded like when nothing covered it. The answer was simple. It sounded like it had accepted the situation. Lying there, I felt something settle into place inside me. Not fear, not anger, understanding. This wasn't about whether I could manage. I could. This was about how quickly being capable replaced being cared for, and how quietly that exchange could happen without anyone thinking to ask whether it should have happened at all. By the 7th day, the word tomorrow started to feel unreliable, not because anything had gone wrong, because it kept arriving without bringing answers with it. Each morning came the same way, quiet, unmarked, unclaimed. I stopped expecting it to feel different. I woke up before my alarm again and lay there staring at the ceiling. Light crept in through the blinds in thin lines, counting time without asking permission. I listened to the house and realized I could tell what time it was just by the sounds it made. That thought stayed with me longer than it should have. I got up and went to the kitchen. The fridge light flicked on too bright. I closed it without taking anything and poured myself a glass of water instead. It felt like enough. For now. At school, a teacher asked us to write the date at the top of our papers. My pen hovered for a second before moving. The numbers felt heavier than usual, like they meant something outside the assignment. Halfway through class, I caught myself counting how many days it had been since my parents left. I stopped when I realized I didn't know the answer. That afternoon, I walked home slower than usual. I took the long way without deciding to. The air had changed, cooler now. The kind of cool that comes quietly, not announcing a season, but suggesting one. When I got home, the house greeted me the same way it always had, neutral, waiting. I dropped my backpack by the door and stood there longer than I needed to. For a moment, I thought about calling my parents, not texting, calling. I picked up my phone. Then I set it back down. Calling felt like crossing a line I didn't know how to uncross. Instead, I pulled the folded paper from my pocket and laid it on the table. 3 dates stared back at me. I added another. 4. I didn't know why I was keeping track like this. I wasn't planning to show it to anyone. I just needed proof for myself that time was actually moving, that I hadn't imagined the stretch of days that all felt the same. That night, my dad texted, "Busy here, you okay?" The question felt automatic, like something sent between meetings instead of meant to be answered honestly. "Yeah," I typed, "all good." I watched the message send and felt something shift inside me. The lie didn't feel heavy, it felt practical. I turned the TV on even though I wasn't watching it. The noise filled the room and made the walls feel closer. When I finally turned it off, the silence felt sharper than before. I went to bed earlier than usual. Not because I was tired, because I didn't know what else to do at the time. Lying there, I thought about how easily routines had thinned out. Meals without schedules, days without markers, nights without endings. It wasn't dramatic. That was the problem. The next morning, I forgot my lunch. I didn't realize until midday when my stomach reminded me. I ignored it until it felt inconvenient to keep ignoring. At lunch, I told my friends I wasn't hungry. No one questioned it. After school, my teacher asked me to stay back. "Everything okay at home?" she asked gently. The question landed softly, too softly to dodge. "Yes," I said. She nodded, but her eyes stayed on me, just long enough for the question to linger between us. "If you need anything," she added, "you can talk to me." I thanked her and left. Walking home, that sentence echoed in my head. If you need anything. I didn't know how to answer that, even to myself. At home, I added another date to the paper. 5. The line of days was starting to look deliberate now, not accidental, not temporary. That night, as I locked the doors and turned off the lights, a thought followed me from room to room. No one had told me how long this was supposed to last. Not really. They had said a quick trip. They had said before you notice. But noticing wasn't something I'd chosen to do. It had happened quietly, in skipped meals and unchecked doors, in dates written on scrap paper, in the space where a parent's voice should have been. Lying in bed, listening to the house settle around me, I realized something that stayed with me long after sleep finally came. The hardest part wasn't being alone. It was realizing no one was wondering how long alone could safely stretch. By the 8th day, silence had learned how to speak for me. Not out loud. Not in words anyone else could hear. It spoke in the pauses between things. Between meals, between messages, between the questions people almost asked and then didn't. That morning, I woke up with a dull ache behind my eyes. Not pain exactly, more like pressure, as if my head had been holding something in place all night and was tired of doing it alone. I sat up and waited for the feeling to pass. It didn't. I went to the kitchen and opened the fridge. The light flicked on, too bright again. I stared at the shelves longer than I needed to, hoping something would feel obvious. Nothing did. I closed the door and poured another glass of water. Water had become my solution to most things. Hunger, restlessness, time. It filled space without asking questions. At school, everything felt louder than usual. Chairs scraping, lockers slamming, laughter bouncing off the walls. I moved through it like it belonged to someone else. Like I was visiting instead of living there. In math class, the teacher asked me to solve a problem on the board. I stood up, chalk in my hand, and realized I hadn't been listening. Not because I was distracted, because my attention had gone somewhere else entirely. "I'm not sure," I said. She nodded and asked someone else. No comment, no concern. The moment passed. That was how most things passed now. At lunch, I sat with my friends and picked at what little I had brought. Someone asked if I wanted a bite of their sandwich. I shook my head and said I wasn't hungry. It wasn't true. It just felt easier than explaining why hunger had started to feel negotiable. After school, I walked home slower than usual. The sky was overcast, the kind of gray that flattened everything into the same shade. The house looked like it always had from the outside. Normal, contained, forgettable. Inside, the quiet greeted me without hesitation. I dropped my backpack and sat on the floor with my back against the couch. Sitting there felt different from sitting at the table. Lower. Quieter. Like I was shrinking into the space instead of occupying it. I pulled the folded paper from my pocket. 5 dates now, a vertical line of proof. I stared at them and realized I hadn't written anything else down. No explanations, no feelings, just days. It occurred to me that if someone found it, they might not understand what it meant. But I would. That night, my mom finally called. Not a text, a call. My phone buzzed on the coffee table, startling me. I answered before it could stop ringing. "Hey," she said. Her voice sounded tired but normal, distracted in a way that suggested she was doing something else at the same time. "Hey," I replied. "How are things going?" she asked. "Fine," I said. There it was again, the word that smoothed everything over. She talked about the trip, meetings, delays, how plans had shifted again. I listened, answering when needed, nodding even though she couldn't see me. "We might need a little more time," she said eventually, "but you're okay, right?" I hesitated. Not long enough for her to notice, long enough for me to feel it. "Yeah," I said. She sounded relieved. "I knew it, you're doing great." When the call ended, I held the phone in my hand longer than necessary. The house rushed back in around me, filling the space her voice had occupied. I realized something then. As long as I said fine, silence could keep answering for me. No one would press. No one would worry. No one would ask how many days had passed. That night, I skipped dinner entirely. Not on purpose. I just forgot. The TV stayed on. Time moved forward without markers. When I finally noticed how late it was, it felt too late to correct it. In bed, my stomach ached softly. Not enough to demand attention, enough to remind me it was there. I turned onto my side and stared at the wall. A thought settled into place, clear and uncomfortable. I could stop this at any time. I could tell someone. I could make noise. But silence was working. It was keeping everything calm. It was keeping adults comfortable. It was keeping just this once intact. And for the first time, I wondered how much of what was happening wasn't because my parents had left, but because I'd learned how to disappear in a way that made it easy for everyone else to keep going. By the 9th day, "I'm fine" wasn't just something I said. It was something I performed. I woke up already tired, like my body had been awake before I was. The ache behind my eyes was still there, dull and familiar now. I sat on the edge of the bed and waited for motivation to arrive. It didn't, so I stood up anyway. The morning moved without shape. I brushed my teeth. I changed my shirt. I didn't eat. Hunger felt like something optional now, an inconvenience I could manage if I stayed distracted. At school, I smiled when people looked at me. I answered questions with enough energy to avoid concern. I laughed when it was expected. I'd learned the timing. That was the dangerous part. No one worries about a kid who knows their cues. In English class, we were asked to write about a place that felt safe. I stared at the blank page longer than I should have. Words floated through my head. Home, room, bed, but none of them settled. Safe didn't feel like a place anymore. It felt like a condition, something that depended on who else was paying attention. I wrote about the library instead. Quiet, predictable, no questions asked. The teacher smiled when she read it. "You write very thoughtfully," she said. I nodded. Thoughtful had become another word people used when they didn't see the whole picture. After school, I walked home slower than usual, dragging my feet without meaning to. The house waited like it always did, door locked, windows dark, nothing about it suggesting there was a child inside keeping things together. I unlocked the door and stepped into the quiet. I didn't turn the lights on. I didn't need to. The dim afternoon light was enough to see where I was going, enough to avoid looking too closely. I went straight to my room and lay down without taking my shoes off. I didn't mean to sleep. My body decided for me. When I woke up, it was dark. For a moment, I didn't know what time it was or what day. That disorientation scared me more than the quiet ever had. I sat up quickly, heart beating harder than it should have. I checked my phone. No messages. I pulled the folded paper from my pocket and unfolded it on the bed. 5 dates stared back at me. Neat, controlled, almost calm. I added another 6. The line was starting to look intentional now, like a count instead of a reminder. That evening, my dad texted, "Still good?" I stared at the screen. I thought about telling the truth. Not dramatically, just honestly. "I'm tired. I'm not sleeping well. I forget to eat sometimes." None of it sounded serious enough to interrupt his day, so I typed what I always did. "Yeah, all good." The message sent. The relief came immediately. That was the part that bothered me most. Relief didn't come from being okay. It came from not causing concern. I made something small to eat. Toast, barely warm, and ate it standing up. Sitting down felt like admitting I was staying. Later, I realized I hadn't spoken out loud all day. Not really. A few words in class. A thank you. Nothing that required breath or intention. I turned the TV on just to hear voices. The laughter felt wrong in the empty room, like it was echoing where people should have been. That night, I stood in the bathroom and looked at myself longer than usual. My face looked the same. Maybe a little paler, maybe a little sharper around the edges. Nothing obvious. That scared me, because nothing obvious meant nothing urgent. I crawled into bed and pulled the blanket up higher than I needed to. The house settled around me, familiar and unbothered. Lying there, a realization formed slowly, carefully, like it didn't want to startle me. As long as I played the role of the kid who was fine, everyone else got to keep playing their roles too. The busy parents, the trusting adults, the temporary absence that never needed reevaluating. I wasn't being ignored. I was being believed. And that belief was keeping me alone. I turned onto my side and stared at the wall until my eyes burned. Tomorrow would come again. I would wake up. I would perform. And unless something broke the pattern, unless someone looked past "I'm fine," this could keep going much longer than anyone had planned. The knock came in the early evening, when the light outside hadn't decided whether to stay or leave. I was sitting at the kitchen table with my homework spread out in front of me. Not really doing it, just keeping the paper occupied. The TV was on in the other room, volume low, filling the house with voices that didn't belong to it. The knock wasn't loud. It wasn't rushed. It was careful. I froze with my pen still in my hand. No one ever knocked on our door like that. Deliveries were dropped. Neighbors waved from across the street. Knocking meant someone expected an answer. I stood up slowly and walked to the door. My heart wasn't racing. It felt heavy instead, like it already knew something was about to change. When I opened it, Mrs. Keller stood there holding a small bag of groceries. "Oh," she said softly, "I hope I'm not interrupting." "No," I said, "it's fine." Her eyes moved past me immediately, scanning the space behind my shoulder. The lights on, the quiet, the way the house didn't react to her presence. "I was heading back from the store," she said, lifting the bag slightly. "Thought I'd see if you needed anything." "I'm okay," I replied automatically. She smiled, but it didn't settle the way smiles usually do. "Your parents still out of town?" "Yes." "When are they coming back?" The word soon rose in my throat like it always did. This time, it stopped there. "I'm not sure," I said. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was focused. Mrs. Keller looked at me again, slower this time. Not searching for something dramatic, just paying attention. "How long have they been gone?" she asked. I swallowed. "About a week." Then, because the truth had already started moving, I added, "More than a week." Her mouth pressed into a thin line. Not anger, not shock. Calculation. "And you've been here by yourself the whole time?" I nodded. She didn't say anything for a moment. She set the grocery bag down on the porch and rested her hand against the door frame, like she needed the support. "Have they been checking in?" she asked. "Yes," I said, then quieter. "Sometimes." That was enough. "Can I come in for a minute?" she asked gently. I stepped aside without thinking. Inside, she didn't comment on anything at first. She didn't ask more questions. She didn't lecture. She just stood there, taking in the room, the counter, the dim light, the silence that hadn't learned how to hide. "You shouldn't be doing this alone," she said finally. "I can handle it," I replied. "I know," she said. "That's what worries me." The words landed harder than anything else had. She asked if I'd eaten. I shrugged. She asked if anyone else knew I was alone. I shook my head. "I'm going to make a call," she said. "Not because you're in trouble, because you shouldn't have to keep performing." That word again. Performing. She stepped outside, leaving the door open. I could hear her voice, low, careful, choosing each word like it mattered. While she talked, I went to my room and pulled my notebook from under the bed. I didn't know why. I just knew I wanted it close. When she came back in, her expression had changed. Not panicked, decided. "I spoke with the school," she said. "They're going to follow up tomorrow." My chest tightened, not with fear, but with relief so sharp it almost hurt. That night, sleep didn't come easily. Not because I was scared, but because something inside me was finally moving again. The pattern that had wrapped itself around my days had been interrupted. At school the next morning, Mr. Dawson asked me to stay after class. "We just want to check in," he said. But the way he looked at me said he already knew this was more than a check-in. They asked calm questions. How long? Who knew? Whether I felt safe? Whether I'd been eating? I answered honestly. It was easier than lying now. That afternoon, my mom called. Her voice was tight, controlled. "Why is your teacher asking questions? Why did Mrs. Keller contact the school?" I held the phone with both hands. "You said it was just for a bit," I said. "It's been more than a week." There was a pause on the line. Then she said, "We're coming back." Not soon, not almost. Back. When the call ended, I sat on the front steps and watched other kids walk past with their parents, backpacks swinging, conversations unfinished. For the first time in days, I didn't feel like I had to hold everything together. Someone had noticed. Not because I'd fallen apart, not because something terrible happened, but because the pattern finally broke. And the silence no longer had to answer for me. After Mrs. Keller made the call, nothing happened all at once. That surprised me. I'd expected sirens, raised voices, someone rushing in to decide everything for me. Instead, there was waiting. Careful, deliberate waiting, like adults had finally realized this wasn't something to handle quickly. That night, I stayed at Mrs. Keller's house. She didn't announce it like a decision. She said it like a fact that had already been true before she spoke it. "You'll sleep here tonight," she said, setting a clean towel on the guest bed. "We'll sort the rest out tomorrow." Her house sounded different. It wasn't quieter. It was fuller. Cabinets opened and closed. Water ran. A radio played softly in another room. I lay in bed listening to those sounds, my body unsure how to respond to a place that didn't require vigilance. I slept deeper than I had in days. In the morning, Mrs. Keller made eggs and toast. She didn't ask how hungry I was. She just put food on a plate and slid it toward me. "Eat what you want," she said. "You don't have to finish." That sentence alone felt strange. I ate more than I meant to. At school, I was pulled out of class mid-morning. Mr. Dawson walked me down the hallway, his hand light on my shoulder. Not guiding, not pushing, just present. We sat in a small office that smelled like paper and old coffee. A woman I didn't know introduced herself with a careful smile and a notebook balanced on her knee. "We're just going to talk," she said. "You're not in trouble." I nodded. She asked me to tell the story. Not the version I'd been giving everyone else, not the "I'm fine" version, the whole one. So I did. I talked about the suitcases by the door, the phrase, "a quick trip," the way days stopped having edges. I told her about standing at the counter to eat because sitting down felt like staying, about the scrap of paper with dates written straight down the page, about learning how easy it was to say soon and make people stop asking questions. I didn't cry. That surprised me too. The woman didn't interrupt. She didn't rush me when I paused. She let the silence stay when I needed it. When I finished, she asked one question. "Did you feel unsafe?" I thought carefully before answering. "No," I said. I felt unattended. She nodded slowly, like that word mattered. That afternoon, my parents called together. Their voices came through the phone layered on top of each other, urgency pressing at the edges. They asked why I hadn't told them it was getting hard, why I hadn't said something sooner. I didn't know how to explain that I hadn't known when sooner was supposed to be. "You kept saying you were fine," my dad said. "I was," I replied, "until I wasn't, and then it felt too late to change the answer." There was silence on the line. Then my mom said quietly, "We're coming home tonight." That night, I stayed at Mrs. Keller's, not because I couldn't go home, because no one wanted the reunion to happen without witnesses, without context, without people who had already heard the story as it really was. Lying in the guest bed, I stared at the ceiling and felt something unfamiliar settle in. I wasn't managing anymore. I was being managed, not controlled, not punished. Held. The next day, meetings happened. Adults talked in low voices. Plans were made with words like temporary and support and next steps. No one spoke over me. When I answered questions, people wrote things down. That mattered more than I expected. I realized something then. Once the story leaves your mouth, it stops belonging only to you. That's frightening, but it's also relief. Because stories carried alone turn into weight. Stories shared become structure. That evening before my parents arrived, I went back to my house briefly with Mrs. Keller, just to get clothes, just to walk through it once with someone else there. The house looked the same, but it felt exposed, like it knew it had been seen. I stood in the kitchen and noticed how quiet it was without being empty, how different that felt now that I had something to compare it to. I didn't linger. Back at Mrs. Keller's, I packed my small bag again, hoodie, toothbrush, notebook. When my parents finally pulled into the driveway next door, I watched from the window. They moved quickly, purposefully, like people trying to catch up to something already ahead of them. I didn't feel angry. I felt steady, because the story was no longer stuck inside me, repeating itself in silence. It had entered the world, and once that happens, nothing goes back to the way it was before. I wasn't there when my parents opened the front door. That was intentional. Mrs. Keller said it gently, like it was practical instead of protective. "Let them see the house first," she told me. "You don't need to be the first thing they face." So I stayed at her kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug that had gone cold, trying not to imagine every detail. But imagination didn't need permission. I pictured the key turning in the lock, the pause that always came after, when someone waited for the house to respond. I wondered what they noticed first. The quiet, probably. Not the peaceful kind, the kind that doesn't answer back. The hallway light still on, even though it was daytime. The kitchen counter cleared but wrong, like no one had stood there deciding what came next. The fridge opened and closed without a comment, because nothing inside explained itself. I wondered if they felt relief for being home, or embarrassment, or something they couldn't name yet. When it was time to go, we didn't meet at the house. We met in an office that belonged to no one. Beige walls, chairs arranged carefully, a table with papers stacked neatly in the middle, like proof that order was possible if someone took responsibility for it. 2 adults I didn't know sat across from us. One spoke, one wrote. My parents sat side by side, too close. Their shoulders touched, like they were trying to brace each other against what was coming. My mom's hands were folded in her lap, twisting slowly. My dad leaned forward, elbows on his knees, ready to explain everything at once. I sat across from them. The woman asked them to describe the trip, why it changed, how long they planned to be gone, what they believed would happen while they were away. They answered quickly. Work schedules, delays, assumptions. They used words like temporary and unexpected and never intended. No one interrupted them. Then the woman turned to me. "Can you tell us what it was like for you?" she asked. I didn't start at the beginning. "It was quiet," I said. My mom blinked. My dad shifted in his seat. "I didn't know when to eat," I continued, "or when to sleep. I didn't know how long you'd be gone, so I stopped waiting for it." My dad opened his mouth, then closed it again. "We trusted you," he said finally, softly. I nodded. I know. That sentence had followed me for weeks. It sounded responsible, complimentary, like something I should have been proud of. But sitting there, it felt incomplete. "Trust isn't the same as being there," I said. My voice didn't shake. That surprised me. The woman wrote something down. More questions followed. How many days? Who knew? Whether anyone stayed with me? Whether I felt safe? My parents answered when it was their turn. They spoke carefully now, slowly, like each word mattered more than before. No one argued with them. No one needed to, because this wasn't about intention anymore. It was about outcome. When the meeting ended, the plan was explained. Temporary arrangements, check-ins, expectations written down instead of assumed. Structure where silence had been doing too much work. No one used the word punishment. They used support. Outside, my mom finally cried. Not loudly. Not in a way that asked for comfort. Just enough that I noticed. She said my name like it was an apology all by itself. "I didn't know," she whispered. I believed her. That didn't undo anything. As we walked back toward Mrs. Keller's house, the streetlights came on one by one. Predictable. Reliable. I noticed how comforting that felt. Light you could count on. I thought about our house now with my parents inside it again. How different it would feel knowing other adults had walked through it, seen it empty, asked questions about it. Not empty of people. Empty of attention. That night, I took my notebook out one last time. I flipped through the pages slowly. Dates, short lines, long pauses between them. On the last page, I didn't write a date. I wrote a sentence. They came back. I closed the notebook and set it on the table beside the bed. For the first time in weeks, I didn't wonder where I'd be sleeping the next night. But I did wonder something else. Whether home would ever feel like a place where time was shared again, instead of something I'd learned how to carry alone. Nothing snapped back into place. That was the part I didn't expect. When everything was over, it didn't feel finished. There was no clean ending, no moment where the house breathed a sigh of relief and became what it had been before. Life resumed carefully, like everyone was walking across a floor they'd only just realized could crack. I moved back home after a while. Not immediately, not without rules. There were schedules now, written ones, names on paper, times circled in pen. Someone always knew where I was supposed to be, and someone always checked that I was there. My parents followed the structure closely at first, too closely. They asked questions they'd never asked before: what I ate, when I slept, whether I felt okay. Sometimes it felt like they were afraid to look away. Other times, it felt like they were waiting for me to tell them everything was fine again, so they could relax back into the version of trust that didn't require attention. I didn't. School returned to normal mostly. Teachers checked in once, then again a few weeks later. Mrs. Keller still waved from across the street, sometimes stopping to ask how things were going. I answered honestly. That was new. At home, the house sounded different. Not louder, more deliberate. Doors opened and closed with purpose. Lights were turned off at night. Meals happened at regular times. Structure filled the spaces where silence used to stretch. But something else had changed too. I noticed things now. When my parents said they'd be late, I listened to how they said it. When plans shifted, I watched whether they were explained or dismissed. When someone said just for a bit, I felt the weight of the words instead of letting them pass. One night, my mom sat on the edge of my bed the way she used to when I was younger. "I really thought you were okay," she said. "I was handling it," I replied. She nodded slowly. "That shouldn't have been your job." She was right. But understanding came after the damage, not before. Some nights I still wake up early, like my body hasn't fully forgotten what it felt like to keep track of time alone. I check the clock. I listen. I remind myself that someone else is awake in the house now, that I'm not invisible. I don't talk about the trip much anymore. I don't need to. The story already did what it needed to do. It changed how adults around me listen. It changed how carefully words are used. It changed what trust looks like. And it changed me. I learned that being capable doesn't mean being complete. That silence can look like peace until it stretches too long. And that just for a bit is never harmless when no one is counting the cost. On the last page of my notebook, the one I almost threw away, I wrote one final line. Not for my parents, for myself. I don't confuse being trusted with being left anymore. Then I closed it. Not because the story was finished, but because I finally knew where it belonged.